Here's the best screenwriting books, in my opinion, ranked. I'm going to give you my list of what I think the top 9 are. And if you're looking for some writing advice and you're not going to get it just from YouTube, you actually want to read a book too. I don't know why you need to when YouTube is such an amazing place, but you might want to read one of these books or all of them. I'll tell you, I've read hundreds of screenwriting books and hundreds of books on writing, and I always get something out of them. I always find some little nugget of information that is new, but on the flip side, they usually really aren't very new. They usually are a repeat of Sid Field Screenplay, the guy who kicked it off by writing the book Screenplay, and which he laid out 3-act structure, which is typically what we use in writing screenplays. It's not the only way to write a screenplay, of course, I'm not saying that, but it is maybe the best way. It is one of the best ways, and it is the most common way to write a screenplay.
Sometimes the old ways are the best.
And it is basically what all of these books are doing. So if you look at this list and you read them one by one, you're going to see that all of these gurus love to change the names of the plot points. Like all of a sudden the inciting incident becomes the big event or the catalyst or the yada yada yada. They're all really offering you the same thing in a new and shiny package. And I'm not knocking these books on doing this, because I think that, like I said, all of these, I've read them and I've always gotten something out of them. Always found them useful, especially this list, which is the top tier. But they are really telling you the same thing in a new way, except for 3 of them on this list. 3 of them on this list actually give you something different. Not even just one little nugget, but they just see story slightly differently. And I'll let you know what those are they get closer to the end for me. Let's start from the bottom, which is my least favorite book on the list. And I might catch some shit from this because this is a giant book that's really important. A lot of people love it. But my least favorite on the list is Save the Cat. Why is it my least favorite on the list? Is it that it's not a good book? No, there's a lot of really great stuff. I think the section on, the idea of saving the cat is a great idea. I actually think instead of just saving the cat, you should also shit on the protagonist, which means, save the cat is we're going to do something really good. We're going to have our hero do something really good so the audience likes them. The shit on the protagonist is we're just going to make them the underdog by shitting on them, right? And I think both can work. My problem with the Save the Cat book is really simple. All of these gurus are creating new names for all of the plot points. So instead of a 3-act structure outline, we got our 15-point beat sheet. So if they're all going to change the names, the books that I like the most are going to have the names that jive with me. And I don't like the names. It's really a shallow reason not to like this, but I just don't like the names. I don't like the name The Bad Guys Close In for the end of Act 3. It just seems simplistic. It seems more like a Disney movie. And I think that's the other thing too, is like how much you like one of these books or which book might be right for you may depend on what kind of thing you're writing. Like if you are writing a Pixar movie or you're writing a Marvel movie, and this is not me shitting on these things because I am not one to do that. I absolutely love, I do not agree with Martin Scorsese. I love me some superhero movies. I am sick of them, but I love them when they're good, and I will probably keep watching them even though I really don't want to see another one for like 3 years. I'd probably watch every one that comes out. I'm just saying, so that book is going to give you a really great template for doing something like that. I think when you look at Blake Snyder, what kind of writer was he? God rest in peace. He passed away a few years ago. He was a Disney writer, right? And so he was a very successful screenwriter, and he wrote for Disney. He only got 2 movies produced, so this is another thing that makes me, I respect the man's success level, but he's one of those unfortunate cases of a screenwriter that had success with movies that never got made, and only 2 of his movies got made, Blank Check and Stop or My Mom Will Shoot. Neither are masterpieces.
Mom, what are you doing here?
Mommy's gotta change you.
There is one chapter which finally is my reason for putting him dead last on this list, is that there's a chapter where he goes off and he says that Memento is not a good movie, or is not as good as Miss Congeniality, because Miss Congeniality made $300 million and Memento only made $100 million or something. And my argument to that is a ridiculous idea. Memento is watched and rewatched to this day. It is probably still making money. And Miss Congeniality is a good movie. I like it. I'm not going to lie. It's pretty good, right? But it is not as rewatchable as Memento. It is not as talked about as Memento. It is not of the impact as Memento. So it feels like Blake Snyder's measurement is how popular a movie is, how much money that movie makes. That's not my measurement. And I think, anybody who's a Kubrick fan, that can't be your measurement either, because every single Stanley Kubrick movie, except for a couple, were absolute bombs on release. John Carpenter movies, most of them, other than Halloween, a bomb on release. Yet masterpieces that are rewatched and make money. That's the other thing, make money. They're part of what keeps these studios afloat, is they've got these back catalogs of great movies. So, not my favorite book, okay? Next on the list, we have The Screenwriter's Bible. This is by David Trottier. And David Trottier, I took classes from David many years ago, and he's a great human being and a great teacher. And it's a great book that builds off of what Sid Field's saying. He's one of the first people to do this, and the book is an excellent dive into screenwriting. I think in some ways he is a little bit better at articulating 3-act structure than Sid Field even is. And in some ways the book is just far more readable than screenplay. But I'm going to put screenplay higher on the list just because it's the OG. You got to kind of do that, right? I mean, and I don't think that necessarily the Screenwriter's Bible does much that screenplay doesn't do. But like I said, it's a great book and worth the read. Down the list further, we are going to have that old screenwriting guru Aristotle's work, Poetics. All right, Poetics. This is one of the books, if you've got to learn story structure, you've got to read it. And it is obviously the most important of these books. And it is pretty short. And it's not an easy read because, he's been dead a long time. No shade thrown at Aristotle, because he came up with one of my favorite ideas of storytelling, which is the idea of catharsis itself, right? This channel gets its name. But I don't think it's that great as a writing manual. I don't think you're going to get a ton out of it, but you probably do have to read it. And so that's why I'm putting it on this list of the 9 books I think you just kind of have to read. Next on the list, and now some of the note on some of these books I have copies of that are in hand, and some of them I do not, because I like to listen to books on Audible, and that's how I have the book. Sometimes I do both, like my copy of Story is dog-eared and well-worn, and the cover is lost, so I'm not going to hold it up and show it to you. I also listen to it on Audible, because sometimes that's just a more digestible way for me to get. I am not an Audible affiliate, but at this point, but I recommend that's a great way to get this in while you're, doing the dishes, working out, whatever you're doing. Some of them I do have a copy of. And here, this is called Wired for Story. And this is a great book, really great ideas on writing by Lisa Cron. And what Lisa Cron's angle is here, she's seeing story as it relates to brain science and how our brain is affected by a story. And there's some really fascinating stuff in here, some good statistics and interesting ideas and about what the story is doing to your brain.
The only way to convince anyone of anything is hardwired into the architecture of the brain, and there's no overriding it. its story.
And then at some point it does become a laid out 3-act structure with the plot points changed, just like all of them, because it comes at it in that really unique angle, telling you how your brain is reacting to the story. It's completely worth the read, and I will definitely put this on the list as the best books written on the art of writing the screenplay. Next on the list, we have The Writer's Journey by Christopher Vogler. Now, this is a book that takes the monomyth, the hero's journey from the hero with 1,000 faces, and distills it into 12 points. So this is the stripped down version of the monomyth that I argued against in my video on what the real hero's journey is, that you can see on the channel. But this is a great book, and the history of this book is pretty interesting. Vogler was a story executive, and he came out with this pamphlet. He'd studied what George Lucas had done with The Hero with 1,000 Faces and Joseph Campbell, and he put this pamphlet out, sort of like Jerry Maguire pamphlet that goes out to everybody, and it was widely read throughout the industry. And he became a story consultant where he works with movies and incorporating the hero's journey into their story. And he worked on things like The Wrestler and Black Swan, Pixar movies. Disney uses his ideas, and Disney really uses his book, and his book has not gone out of print in 40 years. It's a great book. It's a great doorway into The Hero with 1,000 Faces, but not a substitute. All right, there's a reason I'm not going to put The Hero with 1,000 Faces on this list, and that's because The Hero with 1,000 Faces is not a book about story structure. It's a book about comparative psychology, and so it does not belong on this list, but it's a great book that is worth reading. Next on the list, we have the OG Screenplay by Sid Field, probably the first book I ever read on screenwriting, probably the first book most people read on screenwriting, and really one of the most important books on the craft of writing in the past 50 years. As this channel is not meant to be just about screenwriting. I think this is about novel writing. This is about whatever you're writing, because the truth is that 3-act structure has weaseled its way into novel writing and become a really powerful force in the novel writing world. And so you can use that structure for basically anything you're creating, and it does a pretty good job. Sid Field watched some of the greatest movies of all time, and he analyzed and saw that they all had plot points, the same time frames in movies, and that all of these movies were working in the same way. So he didn't come up with an idea about storytelling. He observed what was happening in stories throughout the history of film, and he wrote a book about it, and it has changed the way people write movies. Some would say not for the best, I think for the better, and it certainly is a good way to give yourself some direction. But why I'm going to put it at this point in the list and not in the top 3 is because the top 3 are going to be, you can basically get Sid Field's ideas from any of the other books that are on this list. They're all going to reiterate, except for Poetics, they're all going to reiterate Sid Field's methods in some new pattern or with the names changed, but they're all really taking that same pattern that Sid Field saw in these stories, explaining it in their own way. So you can go with the original, that is a great idea, or you can go with any of these books below. They're going to give you the same. And if you really want help figuring out 3-act structure, you can watch my series on analyzing 3-act structure of several movies, TV pilots, and other things. So now, number 3. Now, this is where the list stops being a reiteration of Sid Field with the names all changed and actually gets original. I'm going to put this one the lowest on the list, which is The Anatomy of Story. Again, this is not a shot. This is, like I said, this is like one of the few books that does not tell you this is 3-act structure. Let me reiterate what Sid Field said. This is giving you 22 steps to becoming a master storyteller. There's a lot of great ideas here. There's some chapters on desire and how the desire is the driving force of the story. There's a chapter on 4-point opposition, how you create your antagonist. The way John Truby attacks story world and genre are really interesting and unique. And so this is like a must read. However, I'm going to say of the three, it's the one I resonate with the least. And I'm going to say, like, this is another thing to know about, I think, all screenwriting gurus and, teachers and everything. The way teaching should work is if somebody says something and it resonates with you, go, ooh, yeah, that's a good idea. That's an idea that I felt but couldn't articulate. Thank you for helping me articulate it. Then that idea is probably true. If you hear an idea about story and your reaction to it is, really? That's a weird idea. I don't really agree with that. Then that's probably not for you. That's not a good idea. Maybe it's a shitty idea, or maybe it just isn't an idea that resonates with the type of storytelling that you want to do, right? Like I think I said before, the Save the Cat book is a great book if you're writing Disney movies, if you're writing Marvel movies, if you're writing romantic comedies. It's going to be what you want. If you want to write like Black Swan or the Florida Project or Moonlight, then it's not going to be. And something like Anatomy of Story is going to be better suited to what you're doing and tell you some things about writing that you didn't see and that you're not going to get from these other books. The last two, and I could, honestly, these two run neck and neck for me. I'm going to give the number 2 slot to Story by Robert McKee, which for a long time was by far my number 1. Okay, best book on writing I have ever read. And what I will say about this book and why I'm going to put it just slightly below the number 1 is that while it is maybe my favorite book on writing, I think it's so dense, it's so thick, it's so full of ideas, it's so comprehensive that it isn't an easy read, and it took me 3 or 4 times to read it. Now that's a strength in one way. This is like a Bible of writing for me. It's just like there's so many ideas in it. A lot of times what he's saying, he comes up with these terms like the negation of the negation, or dramatizing exposition. Sometimes these ideas can be hard to grasp and takes multiple readings. It's not a beginner book. It's more of a book. Once you have dived into some of the easier to digest books like Save the Cat or Screenplay or Wired for Story, you can then read Robert McKee and it'll probably make a little bit more sense. You don't know who Robert McKee is. Robert McKee is the guy that is screaming at Nicolas Cage in the movie Adaptation.
If you can't find that stuff in life, then you, my friend, don't know crap about life. And why the fuck are you wasting my 2 precious hours with your movie?
He puts on these seminars all over the world where he, screams at writers for a few hours and charges thousands of dollars for them. His ideas really are incredible, and they will change the way you view stories. And what's so great about them is they're new. I also think what's so great about this book is it leaves room for every type of story. In Adaptation, it accuses him being too locked into one type of storytelling, but it's really false. If you read the book Story, he lays out a triangle where each end of the triangle he puts a different type of story. He puts at the top the arc plot, which is basically 3-act structure, which is the hero's journey, everything like that. Then he puts over here non-plot, which is something like mini plot, which is Boyhood or something that's like Slice of Life, the Florida Project. And then at this corner he puts anti-plot, which is things that like break structure, like Godard's Weekend or Naked Lunch or something that just blows it out of the water and has no interest in story at all. Tree of Life, something like that. And he tells you that a story can live anywhere on any point in this triangle. So he leaves room for every kind of story, and that's why I think there's such a powerful book with a ton of great ideas. Particularly check out the chapters on dramatizing exposition, character, the negation of the negation. All these ideas were really like life-changing for me, and love this book. Can't say enough. But I'm going to give the edge and my final vote for the number 1 book on screenwriting to this one. Into the Woods by John Yorke, and I'm going to admit it's possibly because it's a bit newer to me, and that, you know, story has kind of burnt out for me after reading it so many times and having it for many years, and this one's kind of new. But what this book does, this book actually is different. Again, this is not a reiteration of Sid Field, but what I love about John Yorke is that he admits in the foreword that all of the screenwriting books, including his, are new takes on 3-act structure, are new takes on Sid Field. But he expands the 3-act structure into 5-act structure, and he really focuses on this idea of the midpoint being the most focal point of the story, where the character travels into the woods and meets some sort of truth, and then has to carry that truth out with them and finally reconcile with it in the end. And so it's a really a different take on 3-act structure, and in his 5-act structure allows for a bit more complexity, and there's some really great stuff about how each act is broken up and given its own antagonists and protagonists and climax and resolution, and really written well and easy to digest. It's going to make sense to you. It's not going to take 3 reads and an audible listen like Story did for me. It's going to make sense to you right away. It's going to change the way you write, and that's why I'm going to give it the slight edge and put it at number 1. All right, so that's my list. Let me know in the comments below if there's a book you think that I missed that is up there and is as good and as important, or if maybe there's a few books that are just not as well known, but I mean, maybe I should know them. I'll let you know if I've read them, what I think of them, and let me know if you think I'm completely wrong, what your favorite is on the list. If you hate Robert McKee, some people do. If you swear by the 15-point beat sheet, I don't know. Let me know.